Hey, Garry Adelman, here we are at the Cedar Creek battlefield at last. We're ready to wrap this series up with a bang. That's Andy Poulton behind the camera. We got Sarah K. Bierle here coming on shortly. We got a special guest I'll introduce in a moment, but just know that here we are following the actual campaign through, 3rd Winchester, and then, you got Fisher's Hill and Tom's Brook in there, and then there's going to be this sort of last-ditch attempt by Jubal Early, and we're going to follow this pretty closely as we go. But first, we need to set the stage. We need to learn a little bit about the 1864 election, a couple other things from our first guest, and with no further ado, let's bring him on. He's John Tracey. He's park historian here at the Cedar Creek and Belle Grove National Historic Park. And but before you tell us about the election or anything, John, tell us a little bit about this park with a long name.
Yeah, hi folks. Yes, we have an awfully long name here. We are a relatively new Civil War battlefield park established in only 2003 here in Middletown, Virginia. Here, the National Park Service works very closely with all of our many partners here: Belle Grove Plantation, the Cedar Creek Battlefield Foundation, the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and Shenandoah County. Just a few partners, just a few names to remember, but we all work together to preserve and interpret the history of this incredible corner of the Shenandoah Valley. Here, we're standing out on the Morning Attack Trail. And in this location, not only are you getting a great view of the preserved landscape here and a little bit of the agricultural history of the Shenandoah Valley, but we have important stories here from before and during the Battle of Cedar Creek. As the Union Army of the Shenandoah, commanded by Philip Sheridan, is encamped in these very fields you see behind me in the weeks leading up to the Battle of Cedar Creek, there's a lot of political things going on. It is the election season for the election of 1864, and it is one of the first elections in which soldiers are voting in the field. And while they are thinking about all of these national politics and who they're going to vote for president, they are also managing quite a few individual state congressional elections. And in fact, the fields behind me here are the camps of future President Rutherford B. Hayes. And as he is camped in these fields, he is running for his congressional seat to represent the state of Ohio as a Republican congressman. Now, he will win that, but first he has to get his way through the Battle of Cedar Creek, which will be also fought in these very fields.
Thanks, John. Andy, if you'll follow me, we're going to come out into these fields that were camps where voting was happening and become battlefield on October 19th, 1864. But before we get to the Battle of Cedar Creek itself, there's some maneuverings that I want to cover that are going to help it make a little more sense as we delve deeper into the battle actions. So we're coming out into the sun. We're going to go out a little bit further because I want you to be able to catch a glimpse of Massanutten Mountain, which is to the south. Massanutten Mountain runs from Strasburg all the way south to approximately Harrisonburg. It's this mountain that sits in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley. It's been used strategically in different campaigns up to this point of the war. Now, if you've watched some of our previous videos in our 1864 autumn campaign swing, we've talked about 3rd Winchester, we've talked about what's happened in the town of Winchester. Now, after that Battle of 3rd Winchester, Jubal Early and his Confederate army are going to fall back south in the Shenandoah Valley. They'll set up a defensive posture at a place called Fisher's Hill, a piece of high ground that runs across the valley. They want to hold this against the advancing Union Army. They don't have enough troops. Also, a flank attack from the Union Army is going to send Early and his infantry, cavalry, and artillery further south into the Shenandoah Valley. The Battle of Fisher's Hill is going to open up the middle portion of the Shenandoah Valley to the Union armies. Sheridan and his Union troops are going to advance into the Shenandoah Valley, and then there's going to be the period that is referred to as the burning. So a systematic destruction of barns, of mills, of supplies that could be used by the Confederate Army. Now, as this destruction happens in the middle and then eventually in the northern portion of the Shenandoah Valley, the Union Army begins pulling back northward. This is going to allow Early and the Confederates to follow the Union Army as they're proceeding northward. On October 9th, 1864, there's the Battle of Tom's Brook. This is a mostly cavalry action, and it's going to push the Confederate cavalry into even more non-effective status. Confederate cavalry is already struggling from a lack of horses. The Battle of Tom's Brook is going to further devastate their ranks, and the limited usage of Confederate cavalry is going to play a role in what happens at the Battle of Cedar Creek. Now, as you might imagine, Confederate soldiers moving through the valley, moving through the burned district, as it's sometimes referred to, are becoming very upset about this destruction that they've seen. They're anxious for revenge. Confederate Jubal Early is also interested in securing a victory in the Shenandoah Valley. Would a Confederate victory play a role in that northern presidential election? Early has his hopes. He comes back moving along Massanutten Mountain, coming up into the Strasburg area. On October 13th, they'll be fighting around Hupp's Hill. And then there's a bit of a pause. Union armies settling into their camps here around Cedar Creek. The Confederates are looking for a way to spring an attack. Confederate General John B. Gordon makes a hiking trip, rides part of the way up, we think, and then hikes the rest of the way to Signal Knob on top of Massanutten Mountain. And according to his account, with field glasses, he sees the Union camps spread out. He claims that he can count cannons. He can see the different brigade and division flags in the camps here along Cedar Creek. And Gordon is going to come back to Early with an idea of springing a flank attack on the Union camps. He does further scouting, or sends out other scouts, and they find what is referred to as a pig path that winds along the base of Massanutten Mountain, brings them to the edge of Cedar Creek, and is a way to possibly get the Confederate infantry into position to make an attack. The wheels are set in motion quite literally for a surprise in the early morning hours of October 19th, 1864. Confederate divisions are going to line up for this attack, and perhaps Andy will be able to put a map on the screen, or maybe you've already seen one in the video here. So we have Gabriel Wharton, who's going to be attacking along the Valley Pike. We have Joseph Kershaw making his crossing of Cedar Creek near Bowman's Ford. And then we have Gordon with his divisions with Ramsher, Pegram, and Evans, who are going to be coming across the creek, coming up into the area of the Union camps. And they make this attack early in the morning. It's autumn in the valley, so picture the beautiful autumn foliage, perhaps a bit of fog laying in the vicinity, and here comes screaming, yelling Confederate troops coming into the Union camps. And it is a surprise attack. Many of the soldiers are caught by surprise. The sentries cut down rather quickly along the creek. And this is going to produce some devastating results. And to talk about the effect of this attack on the Union lines and some of the defense that's made in those early morning hours, I hand it back to John.
What a walking transition there. All right, folks, so as we move into the morning of October 19th, again, it is early morning, it is cold, it is foggy. It's a little hard to imagine what these fields looked like then on a day like today, where it is so sunny and it is a toasty, toasty August day. But the Confederate troops are crossing over Cedar Creek. They are crossing over the Shenandoah River. They are doing it multiple times, sometimes in the dark. They are cold, they are wet, but they are ready to go. And in the fields just on the other side of 81, almost towards the base of Massanutten Mountain, you will have Colonel Joseph Thoburn's division of the Army of West Virginia. Thoburn's division will almost immediately be swept out of their earthworks in the morning. There are lots of accounts of Union soldiers basically stumbling out of their tents, sometimes half-dressed, almost immediately into combat. And as the Confederates are sweeping through Thoburn's command to the south of us, additional Confederate troops under Gordon will be amassing in the fields well beyond what we can see here. And once they get into line in those fields, they will turn and begin coming directly at where we are, coming towards the camps of another division of the Army of West Virginia, this time being that division I mentioned earlier under Rutherford B. Hayes. So Hayes's camps are in these fields that you can see today. And they're going to have a little bit more warning than Thoburn's men did. And so as they begin to hear the sounds of combat, they are maybe moving through their morning routine a little more quickly than they might normally do. They will begin to leave their breakfast half cooked or half eaten and begin dressing themselves for battle and forming into what may resemble a line of battle in the ridge line that we are in here. Well, Confederate accounts said that they swept through Hays pretty quickly. The Union accounts are definitely showing us that there is some form of resistance here in something generally resembling a line of battle along our ridge line here. And so the Confederates will now begin to sweep through the campsites here in the fog, almost getting on top of each other before anybody can see each other long enough to get off a couple scattered volleys. So Hayes's division, as well as an additional provisional division under J. Howard Kitching, will be arrayed in line of battle along this ridge, but they will not be in combat all that long before they too are being pushed northwards back towards either the town of Middletown or directly to the camera's rear towards Belle Grove Plantation, the headquarters of the Army. They are going to be withdrawing pretty quickly because they are going to be outflanked on multiple ends. There will be a brigade of Confederate cavalry that starts to get kind of around and behind them, and there are a few things in the Civil War that will get Union or Confederate infantry soldiers moving faster than if they start to see enemy cavalry getting behind them. And we'll see that quite a few times, not only in the valley in general, but at Cedar Creek specifically. And they too are going to begin to withdraw. But by now, a lot of the Union Army is waking up. A lot of the Union command is figuring out that they are under a massive surprise attack, and Union commanders are going to be figuring out what they're going to do to either stop or at the very least slow down the Confederate assault. And for that, I think we might want to move a little closer to the 8th Vermont line.
Good. So while we're actually walking, thanks, John, we do want to talk a little bit about the 8th. And come on right back here, John, because I'm going to give it right back to you. So there is some real resistance, and for some people, Cedar Creek is their battle. The 8th Vermont was really active between the lines at 3rd Winchester. We didn't mention it in our video, but this is an important battle for them. So they're going to come back here and try to mark the spot as well. So pick up the story, John.
Yes, so at the same time that the Army of West Virginia is arranging itself into line of battle on this ridge, elements of the 19th Corps are getting ready for their day and getting ready for the fight that they can hear and begin to see. One of the key stories of the Battle of Cedar Creek will be Colonel Stephen Thomas's brigade of the 19th Corps, including Thomas's own regiment, the 8th Vermont. So this brigade will be woken up behind the earthworks that their corps has built, and instead of being sent into the earthworks, they will be sent across the valley pike and up to try to connect with the line that their commanders can see forming in those fields we were just at. They will come down through a deep ravine that you can now walk through on our morning attack trails managed by the National Park Service, so you can follow in their footsteps as they, just after they cross the Valley Pike, that major macadamized intersection or a pathway throughout the valley, and you can follow in their footsteps as they go down and up the ravine into the very landscape we're standing in here. Now, this was not wooded in 1864. This is an extension of the field, but their brigade will come into line as quick as they can, coming up the slopes, and as they look into those fields we were just at, they arrive just in time to see Hayes's division in disorder retreating, and they will be left to hold this position on their own. And so we have the 8th Vermont and the rest on the left of the brigade as the rest of the brigade kind of forms into line, moving off to my right here. The 8th Vermont will be on the corner, and just as Hayes's troops were surrounded and pushed back in disorder, the same thing is going to happen as regiment by regiment Thomas's brigade is surrounded, outnumbered, and forced to withdraw. And that leaves the 8th Vermont here in this field by themselves, trying to buy time for the rest of the 19th Corps, for the rest of the 6th Corps to wake up, get their equipment on, form into line of battle, and prepare for the day. And the 8th Vermont is a relatively smaller regiment here than they normally are because they have a lot of folks out on detached picket duty here. So out on this ridgeline, we have maybe 160 guys here, 160 muskets facing down, at the very least, multiple brigades of Confederate soldiers, including what is left of the Stonewall Brigade. And like Garry said, this is, for many men in that regiment, their day. Now, for many men, it's their last day. The 8th Vermont will sustain over 75% casualties, killed, missing, wounded, captured, almost entirely around this monument here. And they use this monument to tell that story. When they come back in 1885 and dedicate this stone, they say that its design is the story of the battle, with one smooth side in which they engrave upon, with 3 rough sides, to represent that they were surrounded on 3 sides, to represent that they lost 3/4 of their number, to represent the 13 of 16, so 3/4 of their field officers that will become casualties. And so they tell their story not only in the inscription, but in the very design of the monument. And so here they are engaged at nearly point-blank range with Confederate troops. They are engaged in hand-to-hand combat. They are nearly devastated. They are completely torn to shreds. But by the time that they are withdrawing back towards Belle Grove for the next stage of the fighting, they have bought at least 30 minutes on their own for the rest of the Union forces to put together. And despite the hand-to-hand combat for their flags, they remove them under their own control from the battlefield.
Good. Thanks, John. I would like to request 2 things. One, try to picture this scene. You just saw some of the fields. You just heard John's description of it. Try to picture the scene that must have burst upon the view of these men as they went into this, and then what happened once they got here. Just imagine something like that. And the second thing is for me to say that this battle is not yet over, and this video is not yet over. We have a lot more to go, so we're going to magically reappear at another place.
Well, as you can see, we've changed locations. We've come about a half-mile northward along the Valley Pike. You may be able to catch some glimpses of it, and we've come to the west side of the Valley Pike. Behind me, you may catch a glimpse of Massanutten Mountain. You may see the stand of trees in the background. That's where we were talking about the 8th Vermont and their stand in the early morning attack hours on October 19th, 1864 during the Battle of Cedar Creek. So now as we've moved position, we've sort of been following in our car and where we stand now, another area where the morning battle is unfolding on that day. And to help us set the scene and describe what's happening here, I'd like to invite our friend from the National Park Service, John Tracey, to join the conversation. John, what's happening out here in the scene behind us on that morning's battle?
Yeah, so what we have today, we're really lucky in that there is a lovely herd of cattle here that is not only testament to the agricultural history of the Shenandoah Valley and the current agricultural use of the valley, but also a really great example of what this looks like in October of 1864, because we are now at Belle Grove Plantation, which, in addition to being a lovely historic home that we'll talk more about a little later, also served as Philip Sheridan's headquarters in the weeks leading up to the Battle of Cedar Creek. And there are even these great accounts from soldiers here that remember the herds of cattle arrayed around the headquarters here. So really great that they are all out here participating. We'll be sure to pay off each and every one of the cows that you see in the background here for their Union labor.
So Belle Grove here has been used as the Union headquarters as the armies pulled back and set up camps in the area. But Philip Sheridan, commander of the Union Army in the Valley at this time, is not actually here at the time of the battle. So John, who is in command as the Confederate troops are coming into the area?
Yes, so Philip Sheridan has been back in D.C. for a little while for a little bit of a meeting about what the Army of the Shenandoah is doing, what it has accomplished, what its future might look like, and what Sheridan's new orders will be. And so he is gone. Now, he has made his way back to Winchester by October 18th, but he is not here at Belle Grove with the rest of his army.
You can see the house that he woke up in on the morning of the battle if you watch our Winchester walking tour.
There we go, full circle. But who we have here instead is we have everybody's favorite or second favorite perhaps behind Sedgwick, 6th Corps Commander Horatio Wright. So he has been moved from command of the 6th Corps up to command of the Army of the Shenandoah, and so he will be who will be in command of the Army on the morning of October 19th as all of these things start to occur suddenly around him and things start to fall apart a little bit, as we were talking about in our previous segment.
So at this point, we have the Army of West Virginia and the 19th Corps that have been pushed into retreat. So we have Union troops fleeing back across this area. Some of the soldiers are going to be heading for Winchester, which is miles northward from here. But as we've mentioned, General Horatio Wright, commander of the 6th Corps, he's on the field, and also the 6th Corps has not yet been hit by these Confederate attacks. John, can you just give us an idea of where the 6th Corps is as Confederates are coming up into the Belle Grove area?
Yeah, so just kind of for some orientation here, we were talking about the Army of West Virginia earlier in that far stand of trees. The 19th Corps is starting the day out in their earthworks along Cedar Creek there, but the 6th Corps is all kind of in the fields beyond to the north and beyond where we are now here at Belle Grove. So the 6th Corps is further out, kind of in, one might consider it more of a reserve position, and so they have more time to kind of wake up, and by this point they are well aware of what is happening. They may not know the details, but they know that there are Confederates somewhere and that the Army of West Virginia and most of the 19th Corps is now retreating in this direction. And so Horatio Wright will be letting James Ricketts, who is in kind of acting command of the 6th Corps, and is moving 2 of their divisions down towards Belle Grove to continue these series of delaying actions in order now to buy time for the Army of West Virginia and the 19th Corps' scattered commands to get out of harm's way, take a minute, take a breath, reform, and see what the day could hold for them.
And as the Union Army is beginning to come together and reform, there's some irony that's going to happen, because at that point, the Confederate command is going to start falling into disarray. So as the Confederate attacks have swept through these camps, as we've described, Union soldiers have left tents standing. Some have left breakfast cooking on the fires. These are Confederate soldiers who are undersupplied and oftentimes underfed. So the smell of bacon cooking, the smell of fresh food is going to tempt men to fall out of the ranks. They have all good intentions of rejoining the ranks later, some of them. Others will take to plundering, although I find it very fascinating that in accounts of this battle, it's every other regiment except your own who is engaged in the plundering. But nonetheless, men are falling out of the Confederate ranks, whether they're collecting supplies or collecting things that they want to take home, or perhaps things they want to try to sell. One guy collects a stack of hats, and it's described that he has a stack of hats on top of his head that is higher than he can reach with his arm, and he's continuing on along the road, continuing on perhaps to rejoin his regiment. I would like to know if he was going to give them to all his friends or if he was going to sell them, but the account did not detail that. Let's go ahead and turn around and take a look at this house that's being used as a headquarters. It will be used as a hospital as the battle continues to unfold. John, do you have anything you want to share about the earlier history, and then we'll bring it right back into 1864? Yeah,
so we are looking at some of the older portions of Belle Grove Plantation. The main plantation manor house is completed around 1797. It is owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and operated by Belle Grove Incorporated. So they are 2 of our partners here with Cedar Creek and Belle Grove National Historical Park that I talked about earlier. And so you can come, you can visit the house, you can take a tour, you can see this landscape, learn all about its history before, during, and after the Civil War at one of the Shenandoah Valley's largest plantations, which relied on the labor of, at its peak, over 100 enslaved people.
And we have a battle unfolding here in the Civil War, and much at stake in the fall of 1864 with election on the line. How is that going to play out in the story of freedom and liberty that is part of our nation's history? As I mentioned before, Belle Grove is used as a hospital. And I want to mention one of perhaps the more famous or high-ranking officers who is brought here for medical care. So we're going to jump ahead just a little bit on our battle timeline. Confederate General Stephen D. Ramseur is wounded. He and his troops are making a stand against Union counterattacks. We'll get into details of that later, but he is going to be mortally wounded. He's being taken off the field in an ambulance. He's captured by Union cavalrymen. eventually he'll end up here inside in one of the rooms at Belle Grove. He's given medical care. He's visited by some former West Point classmates, including George Armstrong Custer, Union Cavalry commander, but Ramser is going to die of his injuries. Now, one of the great tragedies surrounding Ramser's story is that he had just prior to the Battle of Cedar Creek found out that his wife had safely had their baby. But the news that he had received announcing the birth of this child didn't say if it was a boy or a girl. And there's a story that Ramser goes into battle wearing some flowers pinned to his coat in celebration of the baby's safe arrival. He's mortally wounded and he dies without ever knowing that his child is a little girl. She will come to Cedar Creek in later years and be present when a monument is dedicated in her father's honor. So we've got other places we want to show you, other places involved with the 6th Corps line, and we still have Sheridan waking up in Winchester, and he will be arriving at Cedar Creek. So we've got a lot more to show you, and we'll see you at our next stop. I think Garry Adelman heard we were going to Cemetery Hill, but he didn't realize it's the one at Cedar Creek. He's all the way headed to Pennsylvania to check out the one at Gettysburg. But we want to talk about what happened here on this Cemetery Hill just west of the town of Middletown and in the area of fighting of the Battle of Cedar Creek. So let's talk about what happened here on October 19th, 1864, and John Tracey with the National Park Service is back to bring the details.
Hello again. So yes, we are atop Cemetery Hill in Middletown, Virginia, in what is now called Mount Carmel Cemetery. Now, this cemetery predates the battle. It predates the battle by quite a bit. It has gone through decades of interments by the coming of the Civil War, and there is even at least one local Revolutionary War veteran buried here. Now, in the distance, you can yet again see Massanutten Mountain. You know, that's our great geographic anchor here at the Cedar Creek battlefield, because from most places you can see that. So as you work your way through the videos here, you're almost constantly going to be able to see it in the background and think a little bit about the ways in which we are moving through the landscape as we describe this very mobile battle to you. Now, while we were at Belle Grove, we told you that the 6th Corps is still waking up, and that now there were 2 6th Corps divisions moving down towards Belle Grove Plantation, where they will be briefly engaged, but pretty quickly come to see there's a lot of Confederates here and there's not a lot of time for us to anchor ourselves in position, and they are going to begin slowly withdrawing back north. So that brings us to our last division of 6th Corps infantry under George Washington Getty, who will establish his 2,500 or so troops right atop Cemetery Hill here. And so we have some artillery batteries almost kind of where the camera is now, and then deployed in a horseshoe along the slope here will be his infantry brigades. Now at this time, Getty is going to learn that not only is he division commander, but he is now commander of the 6th Corps, because James Ricketts has been wounded somewhere closer to Belle Grove Plantation. Now, Getty is going to plant his division atop this very defendable high ground here and do what all of these other Union commands have been doing throughout the rest of the morning, which is stand as long as they can, take a beating, and buy time for the rest of the army to reposition and reform and prepare for whatever might come next. They will be atop this position as Confederates begin to come from multiple directions towards that horseshoe. A first time, a second time, and a third time, all 3 times being repulsed back down the slopes. At this point, Early's getting kind of fed up with the 6th Corps implanting itself here on the hill, and will proceed to point nearly every artillery piece he has in his army at this hill and shell them for at least 30 minutes straight. And by now, again, there's only 1 Union division up here. And so the Confederates start to kind of work their way around the sides, and Getty says, okay, time to go. And Getty's division will also begin withdrawing northwards away from Middletown and almost in the direction of Winchester. But Getty's division has fought the longest and most successful delaying action of the day so far. Between fending off those attacks and enduring that artillery bombardment, losing one of their brigade commanders, Daniel Bidwell, in the process, Getty's division has bought just about 90 minutes for the other two divisions of the 6th Corps, for the Cavalry Corps, for the 19th Corps, for the Army of West Virginia to withdraw northwards and get their bearings.
And we'll be heading to our next stop, as John said, and there we're going to tell you about the arrival of a Union general and what he decides to do. Will the Union Army retake their camps by sunset? Let's go find out. We've come a little bit further north, following the route of the Cedar Creek Battlefield driving tour, and we're up in the area where the Union troops, the Union divisions, begin to gather and reform. And this is where we get an idea of how important regimental flags, brigade flags, division flags can be. Because you have soldiers who've been surprised, some of them out of their sleep, out of their camps. They've been retreating, some of them have made stands, but then they're forced to fall back. So you have men needing to sort themselves back into their units so that they can be ready to do what's going to come next. Is that going to be stand in a defensive posture and see if the Confederates will continue to attack, or will there be a counterattack, an offensive move against the Confederates, who are themselves slowed, falling into some measure of disarray around Belle Grove, checking out breakfast in the camps, as we've mentioned at one of our previous stops. Well, as this sorting out, if you will, of the Union soldiers is taking place, an important person arrives on the field. It's around 10:30 in the morning, we think, and Union General Philip Sheridan arrives. He's ridden about 12 miles from Winchester. He woke up there, as John mentioned earlier. He's been in Washington, D.C., was returning to his army here in the valley, had paused for the night, spent the night in Winchester. He's getting reports of the fighting here at Cedar Creek. And he gets on his large black horse named Rienzi, and he's going to make the ride here to Cedar Creek. And along the way, he's seeing stragglers who are racing toward Winchester, and he's starting to get reports of the surprise attack that has happened. And he comes up into the area as the troops are reforming, and Sheridan's arrival becomes a morale boost to the Union Army. Many of them have already stopped, as I've mentioned. They're reforming, they're preparing for what comes next. But Sheridan's arrival, Sheridan riding the lines, making promises to the men who encourage them, help to raise their spirits and prepare them for the battle plan that he's going to ask them to do next. Now, as it's safe, we are along an active road. We are going to cross over and get another view. So we were looking to the north. Now we're going to be looking to the south. And as Sheridan arrives and he's riding his lines, preparing the men, talking to his officers, preparing for a counterattack that he wants to make, the Confederate Army, Jubal Early's troops, have paused. Yes, there's that difficulty about having breakfast, plundering camps, but also Early has allowed the battle to halt. And this provides an altercation between Early and one of his division commanders, John B. Gordon. Gordon is very upset. Gordon wants to keep pressing forward the Confederate attack. Early, though, seems satisfied. We've pushed the Army of West Virginia out of their camps. We've pushed the 19th Corps. We're good. We've won a victory that we need to win. And Gordon says it's not enough. We need to keep driving forward. And this becomes an argument between the two of them on the battlefield. And then it becomes an argument that lasts into the post-war years. They will be debating if what becomes termed the fatal halt at Cedar Creek, how much of an effect did this halt have on the battle plan, on what happens next, on Confederate chances for continued success in the Battle of Cedar Creek. So while the Confederates have paused, and they're thinking about regrouping themselves, Sheridan has formed his lines and he is issuing orders for a counterattack. He's telling the men we will regain our camps by sunset. He's making promises that they will push the Confederates off the field and send them to all kinds of places. You can fill in the blanks about what he might have been saying. But essentially, Sheridan is going to set up his line for his counterattack with the infantry in the center, and he's going to put cavalry, thousands of cavalry on both sides of his army. That's going to allow them to use roads that essentially run parallel, the Valley Pike and then what's called Back Road. So he's going to send cavalry sweeping along the sides to keep funneling the Confederates that they're attacking into the center, which is going to then allow the Union infantry to continue pushing forward until those Confederate lines break and they go into a retreat at the Battle of Cedar Creek. So this is Sheridan's plan. He begins to put it into action mid-afternoon on October 19th, 1864. This has been a long day for some of these soldiers on the field, both Union and Confederate. And then these attacks in the late afternoon will start unfolding. There's another stop that we want to go to, so I'm going to hold on sharing how this Union counterattack unfolds into it. We'll talk about it in more depth at our next stop, so we'll see you there. We're now on what would be the outskirts of the village of Middletown during the Civil War. You can see a historic church behind me. It's the area that we were in before, talking about the Union troops forming, Sheridan coming to rally them. That's going to take place further to the north of us. And as I mentioned, the Union line is being formed with the 2 infantry corps formed in the center, cavalry on the sides or the flanks, using those roads that existed, back road and the Valley Pike, to be able to move swiftly in this formation that is going to drive the Confederates into a retreat. That is Sheridan's goal. He is promising the men that they will retake their camps by sunset. And he set up a line to be able to do this massive counterattack. Picture this line of infantry with cavalry on the sides extending for nearly a mile across this part of the Shenandoah Valley that's going to sweep across these rolling hills, over the formed roads, across farmers' fields, and bring the Battle of Cedar Creek to its conclusion as sunset, autumn sunset, is beginning to fall in the Shenandoah Valley. To help pick up the story of this Union counterattack and what happens as twilight is approaching, we'll bring back our friend from the National Park Service, John Tracey.
Sometimes when we talk about Sheridan's ride, it can seem almost overdramatic. It can seem like something that must have been overly embellished in the 1880s as veterans wrote about their service and maybe stretched things a little bit. Or, Sheridan talking about how great he is and maybe over embellishing it. But as much as it seems like something that must have just grown and grown in the years after the war, there are dozens of accounts that are written in letters and in diaries on October 19th from Union soldiers that said, yeah, we were in kind of we'd found our regiment up to the north of town and we weren't sure what was going to happen now. We were organized enough. Some people say that General Wright is putting the army back together and was going to do a counterattack himself. But they all universally say that they saw Sheridan arrive. They saw him ride up and down the lines, and they were absolutely recharged and ready to go. And so we have these period accounts that sound so dramatic that sometimes we think that they aren't what happened, but overwhelmingly it looks like it's what it is. But now that we are in Middletown, behind the camera a little ways is Valley Pike, now modern US 11. Behind me is Church Street. And now the same streets that saw Union troops in retreat in the morning now see victorious Union troops coming back down them, moving just as quickly, except now in pursuit of Confederates. And they will drive them all the way back through town, all the way back through all of those fields that we talked about this morning that were so hard fought over, drive the Confederates over Cedar Creek, where they will continue to be pursued by Union cavalry, cut to shreds with numerous Confederate soldiers being taken prisoner, dozens of Confederate flags being captured, a large number of Confederate artillery pieces being lost as well. In addition, the Union Army has now recaptured every single artillery piece that they had lost during the day. So this morning that began with Union troops in such chaos will now, the day concluding in complete reversal and Union victory. But just as these streets saw Union troops in retreat and then in advance, that means that the town has seen a lot of fighting, and casualties both within town and being brought to town are now here with the need to be treated.
October 19th, 1864 is a hard-fought day, with it looking like a Confederate victory was within the grasp of Jubal Early. Then the arrival of Sheridan, which John has described, and the counterattack that occurs, securing a Union victory by the end of the day. We have about 32,000 Union soldiers on the field during the Battle of Cedar Creek. Their casualty numbers are going to be around 5,700 fallen. And I'll remind you, casualty numbers Casualty refers to dead, wounded, and missing, so our total there. Confederates reached the field of Cedar Creek with about 21,000 men to engage in this fight. And their casualties will be around 3,000 by the end of the day. There are wounded in the field. The fallen will often be buried where they fell until they'll be moved to either national cemeteries or Confederate cemeteries. And here in Middletown, the buildings will be taken over to be used as field hospitals, including the one behind me. And John, did you have some extra details you wanted to share about the location that we're standing?
Yes, so behind us is St. Thomas Chapel. St. Thomas Chapel is an 1830s church predating the Civil War and an immensely important place for the local community. It had been taken over and used by armies throughout the Civil War leading up to this, but perhaps most significantly, it becomes one of the larger field hospitals in the aftermath of the Battle of Cedar Creek. This church has been lovingly preserved by the St. Thomas Trust, and it is fully preserved. It's in great shape. It's very well taken care of, and you can see when you look at sketches by James Taylor, a correspondent who sketched with the Army of the Shenandoah, when you compare those to the current state of the church, which will be overlaid here, you can just see how carefully they have made it look as the same way as it did in the 1800s. And so there were dozens of soldiers being treated during amputations within the church. The churchyard would be filled with the bodies of the wounded and eventually with the creation of caskets for the dead. In addition to the church here, there are, as Sarah noted, various soldiers in private houses. One of them is somebody who we've talked about earlier in this video and who you've heard about in other videos this series. It's Colonel Joseph Thoburn. Thoburn is from Wheeling, West Virginia. Now, it wasn't West Virginia at the start of the war when he left, but became the state of West Virginia partway through the war. Colonel Thoburn was really loved by his men, and while he rose to division command, all the way up to division command, and was one of the more reliable commanders in the 1864 Shenandoah Valley, he never receives that commission as brigadier general. He will be wounded during that chaotic retreat through town as he's trying to rally soldiers. A Confederate cavalryman will ride up to him. Lots of accounts say that that cavalryman was dressed in a Union uniform that had been taken from the camp that morning. And that Confederate cavalryman will ride up to Thoburn and shoot him in the back. He will then proceed to linger throughout most of the evening, long enough to hear of ultimate Union victory before he himself will succumb to his wounds. Now, you've seen a lot of the park here, and you've seen a little bit of what it has to offer and what the various properties run by the NPS and by its partner organizations have here, but you haven't seen everything. And so we'd just like to encourage you to come out and see these properties, visit the National Park Service Visitor Center, visit the park partners and their properties, and see more of the story, attend programs. And to wrap us up, I'm going to hand it back to Sarah.
Now, the Battle of Cedar Creek is fought on the eve of the presidential election in the North. We have Abraham Lincoln running on the Republican ticket for re-election. We have George McClellan running on the Democrat ticket in the North as well. And spoiler alert, Abraham Lincoln is going to win the election. He will be ready to take office for second term. And what happens here at Cedar Creek helps to secure Lincoln's victory in the election. But we also have to realize that what happens at Cedar Creek is combined with other Union victories. The fall of Atlanta in Georgia, the fact that Union armies are beginning to surround Petersburg, pressing in on the supply lines that lead to the Confederate capital of Richmond. But Cedar Creek is one of those Union victories, almost their version of an October surprise, if we can borrow a modern political term without getting into too much trouble. So this victory really has far-reaching effects in the news that is reaching the home front, in the news that is reaching other Union armies and affecting those soldiers' votes. We want to thank you for watching our video series on the 1864 Autumn Campaign in the Shenandoah Valley. We hope that you've been able to join us on this journey by watching on your screens as we visited some of the key sites of battles and happenings in the Shenandoah Valley 160 years ago. Now, I'll let you in on a little secret. While the American Battlefield Trust team has been here in the Shenandoah Valley, we've also been filming videos at battle sites connected to Stonewall Jackson's 1862 Valley Campaign. I can't tell you when those will release exactly, but be on the lookout in the coming weeks and months, because we're going to take you through battles and the campaign in 1862. That campaign that is in the minds of many of the Union and Confederate soldiers as they're battling here in 1864. I want to thank Andy behind the camera. I want to thank John Tracey for joining us on this video. Many thanks to Garry Adelman for letting us come to the Shenandoah Valley. As far as we know, he's still on his way to Cemetery Hill at Gettysburg. But he's been with us in the valley, and it's been wonderful. So I'm Sarah K. Bierle with the American Battlefield Trust. Thank you for what you do to help preserve these places so that we can work with wonderful partners who can help to open them up for further interpretation, that you can come and see and visit. These places matter, and we're really grateful for your work to support education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust's YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.